My name is Nabil. I'm one of the co-organizers for the Essence for Agility meetup. I'll be facilitating today's lovely event. We have a lovely event for you planned. I'll just give you a quick intro to the meetup group for those who's, if it's your first time, and then we can go on to the content of today. So Essence for Agility is a community aimed to explore Essence, which is a standard that describes all practices and methods, which enables us to better pick the right set of practices to suit our context, regardless of which method they belong to. And we can use that to also improve our application of the method, which is pretty much what we'll be exploring today in the context of SAFe. So I'm certainly looking forward to hearing more about how Essence and SAFe can work together and indeed improve the application of SAFe. So we have a star-studded cast for you tonight with the view of Eva, Brian, and Keith. I'll just hand over to them so they can give a quick 10, 30-second intro to themselves. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with them as well, but it would be nice to hear from them. Just a little quick introduction. So any volunteers, Brian, Eva, or Keith, to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, I can start to say, this is Eva, and that's it. Keith.
Needs no more introduction.
Short and sweet, yeah. Hi, my name is Keith Demodonsa. We're working with Eva for about 6 years now, technologist who worked in the smartphone industry before, doing a lot of work with agile transformations and lots of SAFe-related things as an SPCT pass editor.
Okay, then I'm Brian. So SAFe Fellow, I've been teaching training SAFe for almost 15 years, if I check the old timestamps, before it even became SAFe that most people know and see today, back in its very, very early days. First SPCT in Europe, possibly one of the first in the world outside of Scaled Agile. And I've probably taught more of the implementing SAFe course, the big SAFe course, than anyone else around. I think I accidentally may have taught 15% of the world's global population of SPCs. Dean might beat me on that. I'm not quite sure. We'll have to compare notes one of these days, basically. Yeah.
Wow. 15%. So maybe some of the people here have been statistically probably trained by you.
I recognize a fair number of the names, yes.
There you go. Lovely. Okay, so clearly very experienced people and the perfect people to discuss Essence and SAFe and how they can work together. So just quick ground rules. Please remain muted at all times if you're not speaking. This event is being recorded. So you can find it on the comments page of the meetup event in a few days' time, once I'm done editing it. We'll have time for questions, so feel free to use the chat to chat, but also to write any questions that you may have as they pop up throughout the conversation. Feel free to write them there, and we'll do our best to field them either as we go, in the moment, if there's time, and also at the end of the session, we'll have 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes to have a general Q&A. So use the chat, and if we don't field your question during the talk, then we'll field it at the end. So without further ado, I believe Eva will kick us off with a short presentation. So over to you, Eva.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So basically, it's a talk about the Essence and SAFe, and we call it Pieces of a Puzzle. I want to start with an amusing little story. Essence and SAFe, it was created, or let's say driven, separately and independently by two people who were co-workers once upon a time. In year 2000, around year 2000, Dean and I worked together to make RUP the most successful framework ever. And it was actually the most successful framework at that time. And but then later we went different paths. Dean started to present SAFe, and I started to present Essence. Of course, there were other people involved behind it too. If we go up to today, SAFe is by far the most successful framework, method framework the world ever have seen. And Essence is an international standard adopted by 8 of the most well-known method frameworks, and there are more in the pipeline. And what's the future? Well, this meetup will explore if and how Essence and SAFe can be combined to the benefits of the users. We call it SAFe and Essence pieces of a puzzle. And what that means is that they are not competing, they are complementary. Both have different strengths. Essence, SAFe is, if I simplify it and say what is the real super strength of SAFe, it's focused on rich content. It's rich content. And when it comes to Essence, it's about simple adoption. So Essence is talking about the essentials only, and but its real focus is on simple adoption. So it's very small overlap. Let's look at what I call the uncomfortable truth of software engineering. We have a world that looks like a fashion industry. We change fashion, throw out the old fashion, and we adopt the new fashion. We have methods war. Methods war is not like marketing wars. It's more like religious wars. Around every method, there is people who defend the method, and there is an antagonism between different methods. This is, so it's more like religious wars, sects, and so on. It's a little strong words, but I think it's quite good, and there are many people that have written about it, so it's not only our opinion. We are relying on the gurus, not just experts. I was myself a guru 20 years ago. It was, of course, quite fun, but I felt it was unworthy our industry. We should rely on good experts, and gurus are methodology salespeople. We have no common ground between methods, so it's very hard to compare, and you basically have to start all over when you learn a new method, even if you have 20 years experience, because the terminology, vocabulary, the way it's structured, presented is different. And we have a split between industry practice and academic research. Basically, very, very little of academic research is adopted by the industry. And similarly, what the industry uses is often not very little adopted by the academics. And that is really unhealthy. I call these, some of the cases, things with methods and what is practices or whatever. I cannot see it. So, and the word crazy is not the word I usually use, because it's really not professional, but I really, really think this is crazy. And I've written about it on LinkedIn. We look like a fashion industry. So if you go over the years and look, in the 70s, one of the most popular methods, not many of you know about it, but Tom and I know about it, Jackson structured programming. It was really not a big method, but it was really adopted. In the 80s, one of the most popular frameworks was SADT, Structured Analysis and Design Technique. And in 90s, end of 90s, early 2000, Rational Unified Process, my baby. and it was definitely adopted. And somewhere here at the same time, we had CMMI. Every big company had to be CMMI certified. And that was a paradigm that lasted. And now we got some time here, we got Agile, and then right now SAFe is the absolute most dominant and popular framework. So what will we have in the future? Well, we probably know that, some of us, but one of the things it will be, it's very much supported by AI, and that has been in my mind for more than 20 years. So every framework preceding SAFe has been thrown out and replaced by the next big thing. It's enormous waste. And I think the industry has the responsibility to ensure that the knowledge people have acquired with big effort doesn't become waste. Notice I talk about the knowledge. I don't talk about any particular framework, but I talk about the knowledge. And that should be forever. But people, they have the knowledge they acquired, could one way or the other be transformed into a new situation. We have no common ground. That's another big thing. You see here, everyone has their own platform. They share a lot, but it's hidden. Basically, it looks like only the alphabet is the same, at least the English alphabet. And it's difficult to compare and use and adopt from others. Cross-pollination is really good to learn from one another and adopt one another, but not to take from one another. Instead, to just let the people who invented something should are probably the ones who best know how to develop something. So I don't think we are very keen on getting the people who are behind an idea to also own the result of a collaboration. So we, on Essence, found a different path. We found to find a common ground for all methods. So just a few words here. I don't want to get too much into detail about it, but just to get some understanding. So for the first time in our history, we have got the common ground as a standard. So Essence has two components. It's a language. It's a very simple language. You can learn it in just an hour or two. It's visual. It's simple, intuitive, but one thing they have, it's deep semantics. And that is, deep semantics means it's very clear what the meaning is. It's doesn't rely only on intuition. And that means that we can play games and do things that we, and not only a few games, but hundreds of games. So basically any practice can be described using Essence. And then the kernel, which includes the things, essential things we always work with, we always do, and all competences we always need. And the fact that it could be a standard is because there was no objections. And if there were any objections, we're talking about hundreds of people that worked for 5 years to get this standard. If there were any objections, we took it away. Because the importance is not to have the exact as much as possible. The importance to have something that we can use as a platform and make a standard. So Essence is today the common ground for many methods and frameworks. It started with V.F. Sutherland and Scrum at Scale. And that was probably 2017 we started. And Jeff, he was really very positive. He said, we have many quotes from Jeff. One of them is, essence is the key to success for Scrum teams. The Spotify model, very popular. Kanban by David Anderson. Disciplined Agile, Scott Ambler. The Flow System, Nigel Thurlow. Ken Pugh's ATDD and BDD, and Story Maps by Jeff Patton. And there are many in the pipeline. I didn't mention you, Tom, but we are working with Tom and his P language and trying to capture practices from that. So which are the killer use cases for Essence? Well, there are many, but let me mention a few. So organizations can build their own ecosystem of composable practices. And these practices, this is the first time. We have never had anything like this before. We have, of course, had practices, list of practices. We have, if you look at Disciplined Agile had a lot of practices that you can find and adopt, but they are not described at any depth. The description of practice is given to the people who invented them, and in their way, which is different. Everyone has their own way of doing it. And the second thing here is that teams can select their own method from their ecosystem. So within some constraints that are needed. So that is one very important thing. The second thing is that I call it bridging the gap between learning and delivery. And that is the gap where, let's say, the methodologist and the team around the methodologists, they are focused primarily on the learning cycle. They are training people. They are giving certifications and so on. When it comes to delivery, it's usually by consultants. Whereas if you have described your practice with Essence, you can generate tasks that you then move into tools like Jira. So there is a kind of seamlessness between the learning and delivery cycle. I call this problem the Achilles heel of method adoption. So that's another thing. And the third thing is that the Essence gamifies software development, giving teams active instead of passive user experience. By that, I mean that most methods in the past have given a user experience through slides and training, and whereas we've essence-ified practices or methods, the user experience is active thanks to game playing, and games have you play thanks to that there are states. You get an active user experience. The fourth one is something actually came to the list just 2 weeks ago. We have been working with a company in Germany that have had a serious problem with compliance to governmental standards. And Essence is really very helpful to get support compliance. So that is a new thing. But finally, and not the least, is that Essence is the playground for applying AI with ChatGPT-like techniques and intelligent agents. This is something we have been working on for, some of you may know that I've had a company 23 years ago called Jackson that developed the product Waypointer that got an award, Jolt Award, for one of the most interesting tools at that time. But it came at the wrong time, but that experience is incredibly valuable right now. So Essence, we have always, when we worked on Essence, been thinking about how it can be supported with AI technique. So later now, we will, both Keith and Brian will primarily focus on these two things, bridging the gap and making teams getting user experience that is active instead of passive. So now to the end here. So let's go through with team SAFe and Essence pieces of a puzzle. So if we start to talk about content, SAFe is comprehensive and rich. Essence, concise, focus on the essentials only. By essentials, we mean that these are the things that you, as a newcomer to a team, need to know to be able to participate using a particular practice or method. When it comes to training, in short words, SAFe is passive, it's slide-based, and a lot of slides, and Essence is active, game-based. And delivery through consultants. Consultants help teams to adopt the SAFe practices. The problem is there are not so many good consultants. It's not easy to find, even if they are certified in different ways. It's still very hard to get sustainable work. When the Essence is through the team, and Essence helps the team to know what to know what to do. Essence in the point at practices, and the practice will tell in simple words what needs to be done. And when you play games, the teams decide themselves. Of course, consultants is still good, but we don't need many. And then finally, how is it designed? Design of self. SAFe is described with narrative and examples, and it's really hard to keep consistency over so huge volumes of content. Essence is described with a formal language and deep semantics. No one really need to, or the users really need to know about this, because it's like a car. A user doesn't need to know how the car motor functions, but he needs to know how to drive. And this is a metaphor we have had in our minds when we have designed Essence. So thanks to the deep semantics, we can play hundreds of games because we don't have to rely on intuition only. So, and I want to make one special comment, is that in SAFe, we talk about essential SAFe, but that is basically a subset of SAFe, whereas, and not the same at an Essence version of SAFe. It's very different things. Essence of version of SAFe is about the essentials of everything worth talking about in SAFe. So I don't know, but my final words here is that they are complementary, not competing. And if any questions or anything else, I'm more than happy to respond. Have you found anything?
I think the main question is, do you have any plans to revamp Waypointer with AI?
Not Waypointer, but something better. Something that stands on the experience we had from Waypointer. This is my most favorite question. I think we should have a meetup separately talking about why Essence gives enormous value when applying AI technique, because it gives us a playground. So we have something to stand on when we start to prompt questions. And I've already thought about it. I really would like to have a meetup on applying AI techniques to software engineering.
Brilliant. Well, there you go, Olivia. Not quite waypointer, but certainly something to look forward to. Manish, I noticed you have your hands up, so maybe we can field one more question.
Yes, just if you can elaborate a little bit on the difference between Essence and Essential Safe.
Yeah, first of all, I think that it would be better if one of the experts on SAFE does it. But I'd say what I believe it is, and Keith, if you object, I believe that the essentials of SAFE is a subset of SAFE. It's not all of SAFE that is there. Whereas SAFE Essentials, using Essence as a platform, would mean that you describe everything, but only the essence of everything.
Exactly.
Great. Hopefully that helped, Manish.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
And you're welcome with more questions later on. And don't be, if there are anyone here that feel I have gone over the border and said something that is not correct, don't hesitate. I can take it as a man.
Brilliant. Okay, looks like no more questions for now. We've had 2, which is great. So Brian or Keith, would you like to continue?
Yes, I think it's down to me, so I'll take over. So Ivar's really kind of introduced, the concept at a high level about Essence, and also the general problem that he's trying to solve inside our industry. So I'll try and pick up on some of those things as I go through. I'll just talk very, very briefly about what is SAFE. Clearly, but that's not the topic of this actual webinar, but just to remind you that SAFE is evolving. It's at version 6.0, and they describe themselves as a knowledge base of proven integrated principles, practices, and competencies. Okay, and that's the interesting, important thing, that we're talking about a large number of practices that are being collected together, and that is accumulating over time, because there would be a SAFE 7.0 and an 8.0, over time. They have a mission statement as well, really looking to make the world a better place, with their way of working. And as you can hear from Ivar, he is obviously working in a very different space, but he has the same aim, really, to bring some techniques and some tools, a platform for us all to be able to make our world of software engineering better. So I see a sort of an alliance at the very highest level there. SAFE, you might have seen these pictures, and so they have a diagrammatic way of displaying it, which has some layers. The first thing I'll say is that is not the same thing that we're going to show with Essence, although it might look as if it's sort of similar. And SAFE uses a kind of a modified version of Scrum in terms of the way it works, and it runs in longer planning intervals of, say, 10 weeks or 12 weeks, delivering features. But really, the meetings and events that happen at that team of teams space are really, basically inspired from the kind of Scrum sprint events. They're just done with features, with the whole Agile release train, rather than with stories for one single team in one single sprint. And that's why I'm showing this picture here. As I said, SAFE is evolving. Both Brian and myself were involved in implementation before it was even called SAFE. And that's my point, that it is growing constantly, and clearly that's a problem to try to capture that information clearly and in a consistent fashion. And it is going to continue to grow in the future, and therefore having some sort of consistent structure to describe the body of knowledge, seems like it's going to be a very useful thing going forwards. And so cheekily, we're suggesting here's Ivar's book about Essence, perhaps being part of a solution to help them describe and sustain as they go forwards. You saw the slide from Ivar saying what is Essence, and saying that it's really, a language to describe anything. It could be anything. And so we could use it to describe SAFe, just as we have, as you've seen, we've described other practices before. Don't forget that we're saying that there is a big body of knowledge inside SAFe. It is a very rich framework, so it's going to have a very large number of practices. Now, in this webinar, we've got some indicative views of SAFe, but we haven't tried to comprehensively create it. We just really want to give you a flavor of how Essence would plug into a method like SAFe, to give you a real idea about, well, what do those games actually look like, and what kind of problems would it actually solve, and how would you organize the training? So those are the things that we're trying to answer here. But quite aside of that, it's the monolith, the size of the method itself. It should be easier to be able to manage it as it goes forwards if we can describe it in a structured language, and that's what Essence is able to provide. Essence is not a framework. It's a sort of thinking tool as much as anything. So this view is really giving an idea about the suggestion of Essence to say, doesn't matter what you're doing in the software engineering space, you are going to be working in these different dimensions, or what they call alphas. You're trying to progress an opportunity. You'll have a series of stakeholders that you need to manage and satisfy. You're going to have a series of requirements in the very loosest sense of the term. There's going to be a system, a software system. Maybe it's going to be data or something else, but we're talking about a system that we're delivering. And also, this covers the fact that we're going to talk about how the work is done, and clearly that's going to connect to things like Scrum, Kanban, and some of the elements of SAFe. But it also talks about, how teams can organize, and even the way of working. And so that's an interesting dimension, that we can richly describe all of those things in a standard structure. But I've shown the little picture of the SAFe big picture on the top right-hand side. Just because SAFe is arranged in layers in that SAFe big picture, I am not suggesting that they match, or it's similar to the this view that I'm showing of Essence. As you heard, we actually have essentialized a number of practices already. And so what does that actually look like? To answer the question that is, what's the difference between, say, essential SAFe and essentializing something like SAFe? Well, this is essentializing Scrum. And so we end up with a relatively small number of these cards, which describe the key elements in a very concise way about what it is you need to do, what activities you need to take to actually sort of complete, and what artifacts or work products are you actually trying to produce. And I think my next slide is really trying to give that. So, hey, we've got the definitive Scrum guide. It's pretty compact. It's 8 or 9 pages, I believe. But, we can really distill that down into a very small, concise set of cards or online versions. And I'll show you a tool that allows you to represent the same things as well. And so that's the difference. It's just the conciseness that we're describing, but in a formal kind of structure, so that we can compare and contrast and see what it can do, and where we have to look elsewhere with other practices to actually satisfy our needs. So here is another view from of Essence, where it shows these activity spaces, saying, hey, if you have to progress all of those key alphas, well, these are probably the things that you need to do. And so you're basically trying to populate these with activities that the sum of all of your practices is providing to you. And if you have holes or gaps in that, then you need to find other practices to be able to support you to do those other things. So I've overlaid on here the activities for Scrum. And you can see, well, they coordinate the activities, support the team, track the progress, but they themselves, as you well know, don't talk about the solution, the engineering or the software or even requirements, because that's not inside Scrum. And there are some stakeholder things, but there are no explicit activities we would suggest that we'd agreed with Jeff in terms of identifying the opportunities. So you really have to fill all of these space to have a comprehensive delivery process. So I want to now take you forwards and describe to you a little bit about, so, well, what would that look like with SAFe? And to do that, I'm going to show you some screenshots first of a tool that we have, an online tool, which is called TeamSpace. And again, that can be used to compose these practices, but also, importantly, it's a repository of the information and a kind of that keeps the context about what you're doing, say with Scrum or with various different SAFe practices. But very importantly, it shows you why you are actually doing them by taking you back to those kernel alphas. One of the problems working with, very comprehensive ways of working is quite often, people don't really understand the totality of what they're trying to do. And so rather than actually tailor it in the way that perhaps the creators intended it to be done, people tend to just do the checklist thing and just do everything, and that can be just completely unwieldy and cause a lot of failure. And I guess that's a problem that maybe Rational Unified Process suffered from in the past, CMMI. So it doesn't necessarily matter what the thing is if it's comprehensive. If people don't really understand the context and how to make selections and to choose, they end up going to make some bad choices or doing too much and overwhelming themselves and possibly, probably not giving the benefits they want. So having a mechanism and a language that allows you to go back to why am I doing this and see, what we're actually trying to progress in terms of those key parts is very valuable as a learning tool. And you could be looking at this in a training course, in a lesson, but you also could be looking at this as a team, looking at the tool, or an individual, as you actually reflect on actually how you are doing and seeing how well you're actually operating. So here is a view of TeamSpace, and it's showing the same activity spaces that I showed on the previous slide. They're just vertical instead of horizontal. But if you can see on my slide, you can see here's the first of the green ones: explore possibilities, understand stakeholder needs. And so it goes on down. I'll show some other slides showing the yellow ones, just an example. Here are the kernel alphas and shows what states we're actually working on. Notice the tool has the information about the actual the kernel alphas. So if you click on something, it can give you more contextual information, and I'll show you that in a second. So let me just go down. Imagine I'm showing another part of the TeamSpace tool. So here are a lot of the solution-related activities, maybe for dealing with SAFe features, which is something that we're going to talk about a fair amount, just as an example for the rest of this presentation. And we would also see, well, when we do that, what actually is it progressing, that we're trying to do in the bigger picture. Clicking on an item in TeamSpace will actually show you, well, what is it actually achieving? You can see there's a line going, well, if I'm doing continuous exploration, which is something that SAFe describes as part of the kind of overall high-level activity, but often might seem like it's a little bit disconnected from sort of day-to-day work. Well, we could actually see with the tool and by composing this, exactly what does that actually mean? Well, it means that we're actually identifying, that we need features. Perhaps it'll also probably say that it's possible that we need epics, and there will be other links that would go up to that as well. If I click on preparing a feature for the activity, well, it says, hey, what is it doing? It's contributing to moving it to this state. Slicing a feature to make it small enough to fit inside a single PI, because, hey, when you write a feature at the very beginning before you get started, your idea might be too big, so you might need to slice it to be ready to consider in PI planning, but it's still only contributing to get it to ready. And then we could check finally to see, hey, yeah, evaluating the feature against others to say, yep, this is the right size, this is the right kind of scope, we're ready to go into PI planning. So this is just one small example of, the kind of the process. But who's doing this? Well, it's the product management, and various subject matter experts and team members are working to prepare a feature, to slice it if it's too big, and then to compare and evaluate, see if those features are okay. You can also play games in the tool, which I'm about to show you. And so rather than show you more slides, let me just sort of shift over to TeamSpace. The reason why I wasn't showing it from the start with TeamSpace is that I didn't want to give you vertigo because it sometimes zooms in and out a little bit. So here's the tool. Same picture I showed you at the very beginning. And hey, this is that activity space. I could click on here and it's giving me an information about, well, what's the big picture about what I'm actually trying to do? You know, I'm exploring possibilities. How does that relate to something that's happening inside SAFE? If I make it a little bigger, well, continuous exploration generically, okay. But yeah, if I'm really creating an MVP, arguably, yeah, I'm actually searching and trying to explore possibilities. I don't know, and I'm testing a hypothesis. Actually creating the hypothesis before I even start the MVP is really the same thinking process as well. If I move down a little bit, there are a number of portfolio-related activities that happen in SAFE: participatory budgeting, strategic portfolio review, creating the lean business case for epics. So notice some things are about epics, some things about a way of working, but we can represent them in a consistent way. We can say why we are doing them. And if we click on some of the things, we can find out what are they actually progressing as well. And so, hey, if I create an MVP, it's going to help me achieve to confirm whether an epic is viable. Hey, that's pretty useful to know. And it's also making sure I'm properly involved with my stakeholders, because I don't want to move forward without really understanding those. So I just wanted to give you a feel about the dynamic nature of this and the language that's behind that it could be populated with all kinds of things. If I move down, here are those feature activities. And as I showed you in my slides earlier, hey, it's showing it's contributing to that. If I evaluate features, it says, hey, that makes you finally achieve it. Notice something else. It's telling me, hey, this feature practice doesn't deliver the feature or do anything. It stops there. So that's interesting to know, isn't it? Actually, I need other things to do to help me work out how to do the delivery. And so it's as useful to work out what I don't have as well as to work out what I do have and what I do get from the method. So that's giving you a flavor about the context and how you'd actually represent some things inside this tool. You could play games with this in the training courses to make it more active and make people reflect during the training. And so I've got an example here. Here is a game board. We can share with you this an instance of this. If you want to play this game, but with just classic Scrum, you're welcome to. And so you can see here, hey, it says all of the things that are related to Scrum in SAFE. I've hacked it a little bit to make sure that we've got all the things that are matched with the right languages. And we could have a discussion to say, with all of those things, hey, get the team together and say, what do we think is important? And also, what do we think is well? And just sort of put things there as part of a discussion. So although it's a simple game tool, it will promote, a valuable discussion, and we could come up with some ideas and actions maybe outside. So maybe we think team sync is really important, the daily stand-up, as SAFE calls it, the team sync. And we think we're pretty good at it. So let's stick it up there. Let's think about, are we any good at iteration planning? Well, we think it's important, but quite frankly, I don't think we're very good at it based on recent past. So let's identify the areas where we would like to improve. And so you could drag as few or as many to actually seed that discussion. It could be done in a retrospective, or it could be done in a training course, to actually think about what are these components. So that's just one example of a game actually using the tool that we have, TeamSpace. But that game, of course, could be done with those cards printed out on a table or stuck onto a whiteboard as well. So you don't need tools necessarily to engage people in that sort of way. So let me head back to my slides now. So I want to connect things that you get in SAFE training, and to show how, with the example of, say, SAFE features, or maybe talking about user stories, we could connect directly to some representations and assets that Scaled Agile use in their training and also would be used in discussion as well. One thing is this concept of responsibility wheels. They created some graphics for the new version 6.0 earlier this year to make it easier to identify and communicate, well, what is the responsibility of each of the roles in a safe organization. So I'll show you that going forwards. This is one example. So this is for an Agile team, and you can see it's saying, hey, the team plans the work, they deliver value, they get feedback, they improve relentlessly, and they connect with the customer as a whole. And so that's it's useful to know. But if I then think about what if I had some practices identified, well, I could take those safe feature practices, because hey, Agile teams in safe work on features, they break them into stories, but we could actually match the specific states that we have identified for features to the individual parts of this, and then use those cards and the checklists which are actually on them to help have a much more concrete and detailed discussion about, well, when we connect with a customer, what sort of things are we actually doing? What are we asking? How do we know to plan the work? Well, we want to make sure it's ready as a feature, and we want to get to the point where it's committed. And so we can look at the specific information of that and have discussions or use the checklist points and so forth around whichever of these areas of the responsibility wheel that particular practice will cover. Remember, a practice is not automatically going to be comprehensive and cover everything, but it's interesting to see what it does do for us and what we need to look at with other things. So if we want to get better, well, playing games and doing that retro type game that I just showed you actually in the tool, this is one example of how we could improve relentlessly using these, using the attributes. Here are the same cards, but these are now for Scrum. And so not only could they be talking in terms of features, but they could be talking in terms of, hey, they're Scrum practices, and they're matching them to the responsibility wheel. Notice also, basically SAFe tends to talk about and train competencies. And so it's always, you want to be clear about what it is that you want to communicate. Well, we can be very clear about what practices that different roles should understand, and actually give them much more concrete tools to really understand the steps that they need to follow and to reflect on the behaviors that they need to have as well. Here's another one, just as another example, just to show you that they have them for all the roles. Here's one for product management. And again, if we used features, we could say some of the feature cards where they sort of match, because clearly product managers are central into create those features. But there could be some other practices as well. Eva said that we are working with Jeff Patton on story maps. So we could be having another practice, the story map the story map cards that are matched with a little orange edge, as well, and show all of the different practices that we think this person is going to be involved in to have a richer conversation. There's one of the other components inside any Essence practice is that you can capture what it calls patterns. They could be used to describe roles, like the product management, but they also could be capture real patterns. How are good ways of doing stuff? That's often a problem inside training, where you can describe to people, well, what a feature is in SAFe, and here is the actual structure of it. But actually writing a good one, well, that's a different level. And again, the patterns can actually give compact, concise, practical advice to people about, well, how can you make them better, or how can you slice your feature to make it small enough to fit in the PI? And so that's what I'm sort of showing here. Another view is that SAFe talks about competencies. It's based on 7 competencies. The training course is often built lesson by lesson on competencies. And once again, you could match the practices to each of those parts of the competency. So I've just overlaid some here. There will be plenty more on this competency for Agile product delivery. I've just done it as an indicative way. But again, it's showing we can describe the work that people do to get better. The story cards have information and checklists to help people do the work, and they even actually have competence levels that you can say, how competent does somebody need to be able to do this role? So that's another dimension that I'm not showing here, but exists inside Essence. Let me just talk about another game. hey, what if on a team, we're a team and we're just working and we're having trouble kind of working on features? Well, we can use the feature cards to actually play a very simple health check. We could stick them on the wall and then draw some lines underneath it, or we could do the same thing inside any kind of online tool. So here's my game, okay? We've got the cards. The team's just selected these ones to talk about. I think they're the most important. Each person in the team reads the description of the checklists to see what we're trying to do, and they reflect on how good do they think we actually are at it. And we're off. We ask each person to say, for committed, how good are we actually doing that? Everybody votes, and then we see the range and see, where do we think we are? And that's the prompt for the discussion. So it's only a simple tool to promote the discussion, but it gives us some structure to therefore get that richer conversation. And that's really, I think, the advantage that we think Essence gives in any practice. And of course, SAFE contains loads of practices. Therefore, you will get it from this as well, not only in the training course, but also in delivery. This is the connection that Eva was making between training and delivery. We can use the same assets that we saw in the training course day to day when we're actually doing our work and reflect on the same things. And that's a very powerful idea. So that's all I have to say now. So if there are any questions about this section before I pass over to Brian.
There's actually been a whole host of questions. So I'd suggest, but none particularly specific with what you've presented. So maybe I suggest Brian spending a bit of time presenting, and then I think we can just field questions if that unless anyone has anything really specific to ask.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Essence itself is, as you've seen, a very visual language. It's intended for humans to represent human processes and artifacts. And the most obvious thing you'll see are the cards, tactile things you can play games with. That was what a lot of the chat was around. And they're serious games to generate insight about what's going on. And yeah, we can have arguments of when does a game become a workshop a game, and they're one and the same pretty much. It's active engagement with the information, not passive reading of a website. Now, those cards contain brief explanations of a practice, a work item, or a set of state changes, enough to remind us of what we're supposed to be doing when we're doing it. They act as checklists at point of need. Have we done all the activities to say what we're doing, which is how we use them on a day-to-day basis, basically. So what the teams will be using them for. Let's have a look at a feature. Now, the states for a feature you can see in front of you here on the slide. And in SAFE, a feature is a releasable change to the system solution, which means it's the bearer of end value. And a number of teams from the team of teams known as the Agile Release Train will be contributing to realizing that value. There is a life cycle to features. They progress through a number of states, and we can represent them as cards with checklists to remind us what should be true before the feature can move to the next state. And if you keep abstracting up, peeling away every organization's local customizations until you're left with the barest essence of the feature, what we'd suggest is you find these states up here. Requested. A new feature has been identified, and we need to check that it's truly a feature and not another type of backlog item. Hence, on the checklist here, we've got not a story and not an epic. It's got a meaningful name. We know where it's come from and that it's relevant to whatever this release train is trying to do. I like to think that these criteria are all fairly sensible, nothing too onerous, and fairly universally applicable. After all, what we're trying to do is just capture the idea so that it can begin its life. Ready. An idea on its own probably isn't enough information to start the process of planning, implementing, deploying, and releasing the feature. The checks here are guiding us into getting a well-formed feature ready, and these too have been derived by abstracting up, peeling away local customizations until just the essence remains. We need to know that it fits within the time box. what the business need actually is, the benefits it's going to bring, and the cost to us if it isn't done. What the checklist isn't asking for here is solutions, just that it's feasible, that we think it can be tested. The details of how, well, they'll come along later. Now, how you represent this information is up to you. And one of the key things of Essence is separate the representation from the state progression to give yourself freedom of how it's represented. In SAFE, it will be represented using the very simple feature template, a name, a benefits hypothesis, acceptance criteria, with the additional information about cost of delay and size or effort being created as part of prioritization, using weighted shortest job first. Committed. A team somewhere have committed to getting the feature done. Typically, this means that the feature have planned the feature through PI planning event and raise their hands to signify their commitment. In our Agile environment, a plan means stories in a backlog somewhere, a team level backlog, and an understanding of who's taking the lead and who else will be involved. Still not a solution yet. You're planning to solve the problems, not solving them as part of planning. Previewed. Now here's a question for you. When do you demonstrate story? As soon as it's done. You certainly don't leave it till the end of the sprint, the iteration. You want early feedback. When do you demonstrate a feature? When it's done? No. You preview it as soon as it's demonstrable. The feature might not be complete, but the team should be soliciting early feedback to steer themselves towards success. It turns out you might not need the full set of functionality you thought you did back at planning. You might be able to get away with doing a lot less, a smaller set of stories, but you'll only know that if you preview early. If you only demonstrate once all the stories have been done, then you can't do any less because you've done all of them. And previewed is the state that a lot of teams sort of forget about and miss out on. Oop. Get it in the right place. There we go. Accepted. The needs of the feature have been demonstrably, through testing, been fulfilled. And it's in a releasable state. And then released, it's available to the users, the customers. But released isn't the end. Is the feature successful? Have the benefits hypothesis that was initially stated, whether it have they been fulfilled? Whether it's successful or not is somewhat irrelevant. What is important is that the insight gained is used to select better ideas for next time. So that's the life cycle of a feature. And when it's expressed as a set of states, there are some serious games that we can start to play to help understand how the life cycle will be handled. Let's set the states out in succession across the top. In the work area below, we've got a space for recording who's in the lead for getting the feature to the next state, who's participating in making that progress, and who might be involved in supporting that progress. And so it's a facilitated conversation. We could, through those conversations, let's just by example say, maybe the product manager is taking the lead for getting the feature ready. But they're going to draw upon product owners they work with. They'll need technical representation through system architects, which is a broad term that also encompasses compliance, security, and any other specialized, typically centralized technical concerns. And we'll need the business as well to explain what it is they want, what they really, really want from this feature. Now, that group of people can now be empowered to choose a process or practice to get the feature ready, perhaps even a sequence of processes or practices. There's a lot more freedom to choose how things get done if you've a clear understanding of what needs to be achieved, which is what the feature states provide. Who takes the lead on getting a feature committed? Well, in my book, that should be one or more agile teams building a plan from the ground up to get that feature delivered. They'll need input from product management, architecture, the business, but they, the team, should be leading things. And so playing this game, having these conversations with everyone involved as to who should be responsible for what, brings everyone into alignment and agreement over who is responsible for what. Now, I'm not going to play out the rest of the game. Subsequent states are going to be more of the same. You've seen enough now to get the basics of it. Now that you know who's doing what, you can also form a picture of each role's responsibilities. If I highlight the product owner post-its here, we can see the product owner participates in getting the feature ready. And they also participate in getting the feature to committed by helping the Agile team understand the features during any of the planning activities. And so from that, we can also corroborate and ensure that the responsibilities that SAFE provides through the feature wheels, they are also, we are addressing them through here as well. So this example game was all about who's involved, but we could equally have laid the states out and ask what processes or practices are used to get from state to state, insight into the how rather than the who. Visualization. Playing with the physical artifacts is a wonderful thing. It allows you to see the patterns and themes so much easier than just having discussions, basically. Now, SAFE has refreshed and renewed its treatment of flow. They've significantly expanded their advice in SAFE 6.0 on how to achieve flow with their 8 flow accelerators and their advice on what to measure. And the most important flow to focus on is that flow of features, since those are the releasable points that realize value. And most organizations already have some form of visualization in place. A Kanban board, mapping out the processes that move a feature through its life cycle. Now, the first rule of Kanban boards is map out your own process. You have to visualize exactly what is happening now, not an idealized situation, not where you want to be, but all the bad things that are happening right here, right now, so you can see it all going wrong. This is a real world example, including all the bad bits. I'll protect the guilty by withholding the company, the organization's actual name, but it is a real world scenario. Now, we know we need to start measuring things. How long does it take for a feature to make it through the process, or perhaps part of the process? Here, we're measuring planned to deployment, which is the point where the teams commit to doing the feature to the point where the business can now decide whether they want to release it. That's the bit that's under the team's control. And looking at this Kanban board, there's an awful lot of steps involved in getting to deployment. So we should be invoking SAFE principle number 2, apply some systems thinking, and looking at that sequence of steps and trying to improve it, make it better. So this is all about getting features deployed and released. And what helps with that? DevOps. Now, once the mindset is in place that we want to get things out faster, then we can start automating all of the validations, that it happens automatically. Those columns disappear because the robots, the automated systems are doing it, and they will provide us with answers rapidly enough with minimal intervention that we don't need to explicitly visualize the steps anymore. But as you start changing the process, you can run into a problem. Our measurement point has now disappeared, which means we're going to have to change what we're measuring, which in turn means it's not directly comparable to what we've done before. Now, you could mess around with the numbers, but that's just lining up excuses that we're going to have to justify later. Is there a better way? Well, let's lay those features out across the Kanban board, the feature states out across the Kanban board. The Kanban board represents process, the steps used to move the feature from one state to another. Sometimes it takes many steps to move between the state, as can be seen here with requested to ready or accepted to released. And as we've seen, different people might be taking the lead or having different levels of involvement at different points in the process. This existing process doesn't even consider the previewed state. That might not be a problem. It might just be something that happens as part of the process of executing. That gap, an anomaly, has been identified. That's a potentially useful data point for consideration in the future. We won't worry about it for now. That's a different topic, discussion to have later. The thing about the states, particularly these essential states, is that they are a lot more stable than the process. The states typically aren't changed. They aren't tailored to suit your scenario. They're a fundamental property of the thing, in this case, a feature that is being dealt with. That stability is very useful for measurement purposes. We can now measure the time between the state changes. Now, when DevOps comes along and reworks the set of processes to simplify the set that gets us from one state to the next, because we are measuring state to state, the metrics remain valid. You're unlikely to move entire states. If you separate state from process, from the format used to represent the information, then you gain a lot more flexibility to choose and evolve the representation and the processes of manipulation. The bigger organization should focus on the state. If you need to measure progress state to state, not steps in the process. If the organization measures progress, then it's imposing the process upon the teams and hindering them from embracing agility and continual retrospection and improvement. Now, I do need to counterbalance this by saying that whilst the organization measures state to state, the teams, they should be measuring process so that they can retrospect and improve the process. But that's because it's their process to improve. Good governance is checking that you get what you need, but don't dictate to the teams how they fulfill that need. If you don't have to, empower them to have freedom of choice. And Essence gives to you the tools to help the organization make informed decisions about what to track, and it gives the teams tools, insight into which processes could be used to move things forwards. So that's it from me, a little bit of a deep dive into features. And features themselves, the cards here, they are readily available from the IJI website.
Okay, so I think that just takes us to the end, which is just to reinforce the summary that Ivar was presenting at the beginning. You know, you can see, hopefully you can get a flavor that we can create a set of practices, you know, and these don't have to be just from SAFe, or they can be composed from other things. There is a structured way of describing things. We've shown you how you can actually use them in the training courses, but also in the actual workplace, and connecting and bridging those gaps between learning and delivery. And by playing games, you can engage people a little bit more, but at least improve the discussions. As Ivar said, compliance is another thing we haven't talked about here. And you can see, because there's a language behind Essence, it means that, hey, that's really interesting for machine learning. We don't need a lot of data to actually come up with very meaningful inputs to help people and coach them and support them using this method. And that's it. Ivar, do you have any final words?
Nothing particular right now, but I probably will have later. So go on, please.
Maybe we should just move to any more questions. There are some QR codes if you want to download those feature cards and play yourself, or if you want to play with that TeamSpace tool, or if you want to email Ivar. So I'll leave these up while we answer questions.
And yeah, many of you have asked questions, had comments. We will not be able to answer all of them, but please don't hesitate to contact us, and because we don't have your email, so we cannot send emails to you and help answer your questions and give feedback. So please don't hesitate to contact us, please.
Brilliant. And I'm sure one of you can, or you guys can write your emails in the chat so that people have it to hand. Okay, so guys, thank you so much. That was really insightful. There were quite a few questions in the chat, and I can see Steve has his hand up as well. So maybe we can spend a few minutes trying to field as many as possible. Steve, because you have your hand up, there's a few in the chat that I'll get to, but Steve, would you like to quickly ask a question?
Yes. So I understand where you're going with this and the kind of abstracting out across sort of frameworks, methodologies, practices. I really get it and I really like it, but I'm going to find it difficult to convince the people in my organization to put the time and effort into doing this, because we've already got, for example, Scrum Masters, release train engineers, we've got lots of documentation around practices and what have you. And so I'm just wondering how you would sell this to, for example, like a head of agility or a head of like lean agile practices, for example.
Well, first of all, as I've tried to express earlier, is that we don't sit and essentialize any practices ourselves. We work with the founder of a practice. In this case, we work with Scaled Agile to essentialize which part of SAFe that would be most interesting. We could do all of SAFe, but that probably will be a little too much to start with. We need to do experiments and see if it makes sense. So, however, you can still, there is a lot you can do without really doing it fundamental. And applying the essence principles and ideas can be done without making a big deal of it. I suggest, I think you should talk to Brian or Keith about this. How to do it.
It's that point. Don't make a big deal of it. I mean, you can just start adopting some of these little techniques in order just to make things better, easier for the Scrum Masters in the teams, because they've got checklists on cards to help with them. It's not another wholesale transformation. It's not another massive adoption on top of things you've already done before. We end up using a lot of these essence techniques quietly under the radar, which annoys Ivar no end because he wants to make a big song and dance about all these things. But yeah, we're using the cards to say, well, who's doing what? How's it all happening? What's the life cycle of these things? Where do certain activities need to happen in the life cycle? The killer use case that Ivar mentioned was regulatory and compliance, and having the states of both features and epics and knowing the activities that are going on in SAFe. I've worked with various insurance companies to map out when the demands imposed upon them by the regulators, where they can map to points in the process or points in the life cycle of the things we care about, the features and epics. So a lot of this just gets used underneath. And it doesn't invalidate everything that's gone before. The goal is that it can help and support everything that's gone before.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking about it. And it's how I approached it already from the last session that you did, which is to almost look across all the ways that we work, pull out the commonality across them, and help teams to understand where the commonality is, that they can almost to some degree choose which paths to follow to still achieve the same end result to some degree. Yeah. And so I've started doing the same to start using some of the essence approach to kind of almost re-establishing how we work and how we document it to make it easier to find, understand, and what have you. So yeah, that pretty much aligns with what I was already doing. That's cool.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Awesome. A couple more perhaps. From the chat, Wivel, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I saw you had, I think, a few questions. would you like to take the opportunity to ask one of them? I know there was a discussion one on SAFe, and how I think Brian mentioned, Keith mentioned that it's continuing to grow and evolve, which in and of itself poses a bit of a potential risk. So is there anything there you would like to follow up on?
Now I should be unmuted. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
No, it's just I've been around through the early days of Rational Unified Process, even with the Objectory in the beginning in Stockholm. Thanks, Eva, for that. I think we would work together in some cases, and what I saw was that in the beginning, Unified Process was a nice framework and a nice process, but then gradually just added, and even especially when IBM took over, it exploded and it collapsed under its own weight. And I think there's a risk that SAFe can do the same, but as I see it here, Essence can be the how should I put it, the thing that can take out what you need in your special case and navigate through this massive book of information that can make sure that you only take out the stuff that's necessary for you, so you don't have to, as I've seen a lot of people do both with Unified Process and SAFe, that they apply everything because then they haven't missed out on anything that they might find useful, and then just die in that effort.
Yeah, and as SAFe covers more and more ground, everything becomes overwhelming, doesn't it?
Yes, and to start when you're new, you need someone that knows what to pick the essential things, and that's where I see that Essence can come in and see that's how we can customize and use it as some kind of filter on top of this huge body of work that's inside SAFe.
And SAFe know, and they even mentioned it at the last SAFe summit in Prague a month or so ago now, that they know they've got to start breaking SAFe up into smaller, more manageable pieces. Otherwise, the whole just becomes too much. The question becomes, are they going to do that through their own mechanics, or are they going to adopt a common framework so they can reuse the practices that have already been essentialized, that they themselves have adopted as the foundations, because they are just a methodology that is comprised of existing practices. Which way they're going to go with that, I don't know. I will try and persuade them to be sensible and adopt the common standard. But when you're the leader and got lots of money sloshing around, you can do what you like.
That's true, but
including reinventing wheels, if that makes sense, to spend money on reinventing wheels. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Quick fire one. How do you become an Essence trainer? Can you become an Essence trainer? I asked for the benefit of Howley.
That's got to be an Eva or a Graham answer. I have no idea. I'm not an Essence trainer. I just make it up as I'm going along.
Hey, Graham, do you want to take it? Otherwise, I can do it.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So certainly, we have some certifications around the standard, and that's the place to start. It's then a case of on-the-job experience of coaching teams through using it. So I put my email address actually in the comment in the chat earlier. So please, give me a shout if anyone's interested in doing that. Very much so.
Graham is COO of a company.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Graham. Great. So, Howley, hopefully that answers your question. And Graham provided his email address earlier, so you can reach out to him directly as well. I know it's getting a bit late. Maybe one final question that I thought was interesting. Tom, ever-present Tom, asks, well, he can ask you himself. He's usually keen to. Tom, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, it's a question that's going to, everybody's hopefully going to be interested in. How do we choose the components? Ideally, you'd have some knowledge of their cost effectiveness before you chose them. And then how can we validate that the components we've chosen are giving us good results? And I think the results have to be business results, not merely popularity. of technique results. So the general question is, how are people on a continuing basis going to understand whether they're making wise essence selection decisions? And maybe that's something that the Essence organization could think about and perhaps suggest to users. You know, how do you make intelligent selections of Essence components?
Of course, we have a practice for developing practices. And that's how you find good practices, how you actually come up with what is the practice, what are the key elements, what are the work products, what are the patterns, and so on. But I will let Simon, if you are here, jump in. And since you have done a lot of that work, maybe a few words from you.
Thank you, Eva. Can you just repeat the question? I was mid stirring a risotto.
Okay. Basically, how do you find the good elements for both finding good components, practices, and its internal? But I warn you, you don't have many minutes. So now.
No, so there's a number of ways to do that. And a good place to start is to think about what's the most important things that you care about in your practice. Is it something like a feature, like Brian was describing? Is it something like the mindset of the team or the complexity of the problem that you're trying to face? So thinking about what's important, and that might be your alpha, and that might have states that you care about, what state it's in, and you want to use that to measure progress of your endeavor. And the other place to start is easier sometimes to spot, which is what do you do? Start with your activities, and then for each activity say, why am I doing that? What is it producing, or what does it tell me about my practice? So there's a couple of ways to start, but the other way is just good old-fashioned noun grabbing, like we used to do with use cases. Read the practice description, grab all the nouns and all the verbs, and see if that's a good start.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I know risotto requires lots of stirring, so I appreciate you taking time out of that, Simon.
Pleasure.
He is expert on risotto.
Yes, any risotto-related questions? Now is the time to ask.
You have a chance.
Which kind of risotto?
It's mushroom and spinach.
Oh, nice. When should we come?
So
truffle is a great one to mix in with mushroom risotto. Truffle and mushroom.
Truffle works to
I do have some frozen truffle parmesan cheese, so that's a good shout, Nabil. Thank you.
Do you have wine?
I will have wine, yes.
I'm getting hungry again. Thanks, guys.
Well, I think this is a lovely way to end the meetup, and we've got some ideas for. We even talked about kitchens and recipes and ingredients in the chat earlier, so it's all coming together.
So the final words is please don't hesitate to send us your email, because we don't have your email. If you ever had any questions, we will respond to them, but we need your email address.
Absolutely. So feel free to reach out to the several people who provided emails, Eva, Graham, etc., Keith and Brian as well. Guys, thank you so much. This is the time where I do my awkward round of applause for our lovely speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There we go. The video recording will be up in a few days. I'll also grab the slides from the guys and share that as well, so you guys will have the slides. And yeah, thank you so much. Quick notes, Simon will be, good news for you guys, Simon will be playing more of a part of facilitating some of the future meetups, I believe. So you can look forward to him in space of me. Please continue the awkward claps. That's my only request, Simon. But otherwise, yeah, you can see more of Simon facilitating some of these meetups moving forward. And obviously, he knows everything about Essence. So I think he'll provide, obviously, amazing input into the conversations as well. So thank you so much, everyone. Brian, Keith, and Eva, thank you so much. It's been an insightful conversation, loads of great ideas to move forward, and see you guys at the next one.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Nabil. Thank you very much, Nabil.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thanks
Thank you for
Nabil.
joining, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye, guys.